Today we are making modular trenches. This is gonna be fun. I'll start by making some bases out of 3mm MDF and I'll cut up some EPS foam to form the rough shape of the trenches. I've got a lot to do, so let's get started. Well, that was a lot faster than I expected. The hobby saw made nice clean cuts and it was fairly quick too. It's late in the evening now, so I'll leave them to dry overnight. The glue has dried and the 4 sections are lining up nicely. Now it's time to shape them more like dirt mounds. The tricky thing will be to make sure that the connection points still line up when I shape them. I'll try to make some irregularities in the foam that'll make it easier to place minis on the terrain. I'll start with a craft knife and then I'll go outside and melt the foam slightly with a heat gun. I want the hill to be surrounded by rocks. I'm gonna start by making some plaster rocks. I'll use my rock molds from Woodland Scenics, but you can make your own by crinkling up some aluminum foil slightly, unwrap it and shape it into a ball. Before pouring the plaster, you can wet the mold to make sure that the plaster gets into all the corners and you get fewer bubbles. When they're dry, which shouldn't take too long, I'll hot glue them in place. I'll also add corrugated metal sheets inside the trenches. That will prevent the walls from collapsing. For this I'll use corrugated paper and wood skewers. Let's do it. Everything's looking good so far. Now it's time to make a mess and add the ground texture. I'll make it from a mix of wall filler, brown paint, some PVA to keep it all together, and I'll also add some coconut fiber to the mix to make it look like roots and whatever else you might find in the ground. It's my first time using coconut fibers. Apparently it expands quite a bit when you add liquid to it. PVA famously contracts when it dries, so it'll be interesting to see what the result of mixing those will be. I'll also add some debris to the ground texture while it's wet. In the trenches I'll place duck boards on the floor. Duck boards were placed in trenches so soldiers wouldn't stand with their feet in water for days or weeks and get trench foot. There's lots to do, so I'd better get back to work. The ground texture is looking really good. The color isn't exactly what I want it to be, so I might paint it or cover it with some soil. But even so, adding paint to the mix means that when some of the ground texture breaks off, it'll be brown on the inside instead of white, so it won't be that noticeable. I think painting the duckboards and the plaster rocks is a good place to continue. I'll use watered down paints for that. I know from experience that black is much stronger than the other colors when applied to the rocks, so I'll water it down a lot more than the other colors. I'll test it in places that would be in shadow until I find a good mix. I decided to add some soil to get some variation in color and texture. Now I'm going to make some sandbag fortifications. My plan is to place sandbags so there'll be places where the minis can be completely hidden and places where they can see over the edge. Now it's time to do what I've been looking forward to the most in this project. Flocking. I recently got a static grass applicator and a bunch of static grass, and this is my first time trying them out. When I started out, my plan was to cover the ground completely, but the ground texture worked out so well that I don't want to cover it all. I'll try to add the grass where the vegetation would be the least disturbed by battle. If you don't have a static grass applicator, which I'm assuming most of you don't, I can recommend Foam Flux from Woodland Scenics, which is what I've been using so far. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank all my patrons who make this channel possible. Everything's coming together now. Let's do the finishing touches. And it's finally done. It's been a lot of fun doing this project, and I'm glad I had a chance to try out some new materials and tools. By request I started a Patreon thing, so if you want to support the channel and hang out, head on over there. And without further ado, here are the final results.